Welcome to a new episode of my Dear Kitchen in Helsinki podcast. My guest today is postdoctoral researcher Galina Kallio from the University of Helsinki, and she is also one of the founding members of Kaupunkilaisten Oma Pelto food collective. Galina is a researcher in alternative food economies, and together we discussed Oma Pelto and other food collectives. You can find information about how to participate in Oma Pelto and other details on www.omapelto.fi. And you can find more information on Galina's work on her website galinakallio.fi. At the end of the podcast, Galina has a question for you. Please listen to the question and write your opinions as a comment on social media or the platform you listen to the podcast. As always, special thanks to my dear friend Ufuk Evcimen for the sound editing. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being in the interview. Now, when we first talked in the emails, I was just thinking about talking about Oma Pelto. But after reading your extra reading materials, like real research, I wanted to expand this also a bit further to food collectives in general in the local context of Finland. So we'll first talk about Oma Pelto and then a little bit more about other food collectives. But before we dive deeper into this, can you introduce yourself briefly, your academic background, your research interests, and maybe your relationship with Oma Pelto?
Yes, of course. So thank you for having me. I'm now currently working at the University of Helsinki Ruralia Institute as a postdoctoral researcher, and I'm studying and researching regenerative food systems and agriculture and farming. And basically regenerative means that the people who strive to improve the conditions of their soils while farming and while producing food, and also pay attention to biodiversity and other sustainability issues, also in terms of sustainable livelihoods. So all of these factors are important. So I'm interested in how people go about their work, and I worked at the farms also, and try to engage as much as I can in understanding these different regenerative practices of food production. Mm-hmm. So my background is in critical organization studies, which basically means that I have spent quite a lot of time in examining alternative systems of food production and consumption, alternative economies, if you will. So what are the ways that people actually organize the market economy differently? Mm. How do they form relations beyond the logic of the market, and what are these relationships like? So I have spent quite a lot of time in examining, and food collectives, food cooperatives, and these community-supported agriculture that we're going to be talking about today are very good examples of how to do things differently, how to engage in exchanges that are actually supporting the local livelihoods and supporting sustainability and the needs of the local people.
Mm-hmm. Now let's go into Oma Pelto. First of all, what does Oma Pelto mean for the non-Finnish speaking listeners? And also then, what is Oma Pelto? I mean, what is its working model and how did it emerge?
Yeah. So Kaupunkilaisten Oma Pelto, in English we call it urban cooperative farm. Mm. So it is basically a model of CSA, which is community supported agriculture. Mm-hmm. And community supported agriculture means very simply that households form relationships with farmers and those who produce the food. And with different types of contracts, it depends on the type of the community-supported agriculture. With different types of contracts, households commit to usually to yearly harvests within kind of buying in advance from the farmers. This is what community-supported agriculture ideally is about. And Kaupunkilaisten Oma Pelto, our urban cooperative farm, was founded in, actually, this is an anniversary year for our Oma Pelto, because it was founded in 2011. I was one of the founding members, actually, at the time.
Okay.
And there are still some people engaged who have been already 10 years as part of this project. I think the history is very interesting, because usually what happens with these community-supported agriculture cooperatives is that there are farms who kind of initiate. They give out shares, if you will. They provide for the households a possibility to buy their produce on a monthly subscription, for instance, or on a yearly share that they sell.
Yeah.
And then as part of that contract, households can commit to, for instance, volunteering at the farm, or coming and pick up their own harvest, or something, or working at the distribution points and events. But at Kaupunkilaisten Oma Pelto, the thing was that we actually contacted several farmers, but none of the farmers actually said that they're gonna go into this. So it was so new that none of the farmers could at that moment commit to just start doing things differently as they used to do, because farmers usually have their own customers already, or they are committed to selling to some wholesales or whatever these, channels are that they sell their produce through. So we couldn't find any farmer who would suddenly take 70 households and share and sell shares for a whole year to these people. So what we did was that we rented out a field. We hired gardeners, or actually there was one gardener. Now there are, depending on the year, there are 2 to 4 paid salary workers who farm and who have the ability and their profession. They're professionals in farming. So we employ actually at least 2 farmers per year, which is, for us, it has been from the start, it has been very important to pay a decent salary for those people who produce our work, because we all know that farmers are on a really tight position, and their hourly salary can even be negative. So they put more effort into producing food than they get out of it eventually. So this is how we emerged, and we sort of rented out the field, and then we had these people who committed, and we were selling, or we built a cooperative. So as part of cooperative, you are a member, right? So you pay a certain amount to become a member, and then every year you pay a certain amount to have the share. And how it actually works is that every week or every 2 weeks, you receive a bag. And for us, it's very important that harvest that we receive, it's actually something that we don't decide in advance. So we cannot pick that this week I want these items, but it's rather, it's depending on how successful the harvest, the production is, and what actually comes out of the field. Of course, it's planned in advance, so we know when and what is being cultivated, but still, it's not like you go to the supermarket and pick whatever you want, but it's rather that you get what the soil and the land gives you at that moment.
Where is that field located? I mean, is it in Helsinki or close to Helsinki?
Yeah, it's located in Korso. Korso is not in Helsinki region, but it's in the metropolitan area still, in the sense that I believe it's in Vantaa area. Okay. But you can access by train. So people travel by train, or they take cars. Some people have taken their bike. Even it's some 20-25 kilometers. So it's not impossible to do that. Yeah.
Okay. So How do you think Oma Pelto contributes to the local food system and the sustainability of the local system? And maybe you can explain what the local food sustainability means for you when you're explaining this.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's where we need to start with or from, because sustainability is a broad concept, and it is loaded with meanings that are not necessarily shared. Mm-hmm. And when I speak of it, I speak from the very experience of myself being very critical towards, for instance, the concept of sustainable development, mm-hmm. where we sort of usually refer and go back to when we speak of sustainability, and the three dimensions of it, the environmental, economic, and social, and sort of the. Yeah, so it's a very important question to start from where, what is the sustainability of the local food system? I guess that I have thought about it in a way that that it means thinking of the ecological factors, the ecological possibilities and boundaries that exist locally, what is possible in a way that doesn't degenerate, but it rather regenerates. So it creates more possibilities for continuing that same activity in the future without many external inputs, without being very dependent on super long chains and different power relations that are engaged in these supply chains. So increasing local sort of resilience, if you will, in that sense. Also, I think that in this context, if we speak about Oma Pelto, one important aspect is the social aspect of it. That how does this kind of an initiative, where people sort of are a collective, how does it actually maybe improve their social well-being, or maybe build a community, or how does it enable these? And I think that here we come to this, it's always very challenging at these times when we are speaking now with this physical distancing going on and the corona pandemic and all of these things, that part of this very intense social aspect, where we actually need people to commit and to engage and to meet each other and be present physically, like working in the field and working at the distribution and all of these. But so coming back to the question that how does Oma Pelto contribute to this, I believe that in concrete ways, of course, because it is a biodynamic farm, which to many is not, maybe biodynamic is not very familiar, but biodynamic is like the next level of organic. It's sort of taking to the next level in the way that there are, of course, similar things to organic, that we don't use any chemicals or any chemical fertilizers or pesticides or anything like that. And there is a rotation, which basically means that the fields are under continuous sort of, we try to improve the condition of the soil by different means. And what distinguishes biodynamic is that you use compost in order to improve and soil and give nutrition to the plants and to the soil, but also preparates are part of the. It's a kind of it's part of the process of enabling also the soil health, mm-hmm. improving the condition of the plants as well.
Okay. I'm curious because I'm very interested in things, topics such as seed sovereignty and seeds. So where do the farmers that you're working with get their seeds? What kind of seeds are they using?
Yeah, it's a very relevant question, because usually forget about seeds, as if the plants just appear and they start growing. So it's very important to ask, where do the seeds come from, and who controls these seeds, and how do we get them? We are not doing any seed reproduction activities at the moment, and we're not at the moment collecting seeds actively at the field. So seeds, some seeds are bought. They're biodynamic seeds, which are bought from this. It's an organization actually in Germany that is a large distributor of biodynamic seeds, and I will remember probably its name later on. But it's But then we also buy plants, like small transplants that have been already sowed and grown in other farms, or in one particular other biodynamic farm, and they also get their seeds from the same supplier, this biodynamic supplier of seeds that is in Germany. There are very little seeds that are used that are local in that sense.
Are you thinking at some point to reproduce your own seeds? I don't know if you need any bigger thing, of course, to do that, bigger than what you already have. Or is there a plan? Is there such a plan for the future?
We haven't talked about it. Some farmers actually do it, and I know that for instance at Oma, which is another food co-op, they do some seed saving activities, and they actively sort of try to save some of the seeds. And it's also more common with cereals, with grains, to take your own seeds from them. But very few activities within vegetables and those kinds of plants and varieties. It's challenging in Finnish conditions, and some of them, like root vegetables, they require 2 years of, so they require the winter season, and it's not very clear whether they will survive the Finnish winters. There are many issues that are here. I see it as one of the directions that needs to come at some point, considering the current ecological crisis. I see it one of the main issues.
Now, you already said a little bit about people's activities, not the farmers, but the participants, or the people in the food collective, having volunteering and things like that. So exactly what kind of interactions or relations occur between the people who are part of Oma Pelto?
So people can choose quite freely how they engage. Some people don't engage at all, meaning that what they do is that they just come and pick up their bags. We have thought this in a way that not all people have the possibility or the abilities or the capabilities to give their time. So this is one of the issues that we're currently facing at this society, where the value is towards the work that is paid. It's a paid job, it's a salary. And then everything else that you do, all the other type of work, it doesn't have the same value, because it's a complex issue, but this is how I see it. So there's a challenge that when we sort of commit to being part of this wage labor society where we work from 8 till well, some people work from 8 till 8. I mean, many people do that. There is not a lot of time. And then on top of that, you have your household and you have your kids and you have all of these. So the kind of interactions that happen, they for instance, they happen when people meet, when they come and pick up their food, but they can decide how much they engage in interactions. They happen online on Facebook groups, when people share their recipes, when people sort of ask something about farmers write a blog. So that's a kind of an interaction also that farmers try to do when they tell what happens in the field, and you can sort of relate and read and be informed in a way. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, what I consider the most important interaction, and I consider this, that it would be perfect, is if everyone who is as a member in this field would go and actually work and visit the fields, because the best interactions are those where we meet personally, when we physically do some kind of labor, when we interact not only with other people, but also with the soils, with the plants, with the tools, with all the materialities that are there. And I think this is very important, because our embodied memory is the most powerful to change our ways of relating to this world. We can speak as much as we will, but the memory doesn't stick as well as it sticks in our bodies when we physically engage in something. So therefore, I believe that those kinds of interactions that the field allows and enables are the best. And we always welcome, so you can come to the field at any time you want. And this is something that people might not realize, that it's actually a cooperative, it's our Oma Pelto, own farm, literally, right? It's nobody else's. Everybody can go there. Mm-hmm. And whenever they want, and do something. So try to feel a bit of an ownership of that interaction.
Yeah, and I highly agree about it changes. I mean, I visited Lassila farm that Oma is working with, and the farm itself several times, and it is a life-changing thing. Even though I didn't really do much. I mean, I probably pulled a few carrots from the soil, but it was to see all these sustainability or agriculture, whatever that we talk about, being in action was really very, it really changed my view on so many things, even after the very first visit. So I really agree with that. But you also talked just now about values, and I want to come to that, because in one of the articles that you shared with me, you talk about values that you commonly found in the food collectives that you researched. Now, can you explain these values a little bit for the listeners, and then discuss Oma Pelto from the point of values?
Yeah. Sure. I try to be brief. The article you referred to is titled "A carrot isn't a carrot isn't a carrot," because it isn't a carrot.
Yeah.
And the main argument that I sort of developed in that article is actually that we tend to think of values as if they are static, as if values are something that we either as humans collectively or individually possess, as if they are in us somehow, just entities that we sort of possess and that somehow influence our actions. Or we perceive values as an outcome of something. For instance, a price. We can measure some kind of value of food through price, or there can be some other values such as family or something else that is or quality, or something that we sort of measure afterwards, that we tend to grasp as if, this food is pure, this food is good, and then we create criteria to measure those. But both ways of thinking of values, or value as price, or value as the pre-existing values of the society or of communities or of individual people, are very static. And what I do in that article is that I try to show that values exist only and when we actually act upon them. That values are embedded in our action. And what I mean by that is that if a food collective or our food Oma Pelto says that you can identify that one of the values might be this particular type of good food, right? That people seek for good food. What does it really mean? It's continuously it changes what it means, because we learn what is good food in a particular context, right? So it's not, we can try to identify some qualities of that food, but at the same time, we are testing those qualities while we interact upon that food. For instance, purity of food, that it's pure or clean or whatever, it doesn't mean that it actually means that it's dirty, right? So pure food is dirty because it has soil on it. It's, so there are these, so what does it actually, so I'm asking, what does this mean in practice? What does good food mean in practice for these people? And what I actually found was that it means different things because people act upon it differently, even though they all consider particular food to be good. But for some people, good food is vegetarian food. For other people, good food is kosher meat. For other, so there are this performativity that engages us in continuously sort of refining the values or trying and testing them out. And I speak of three kind of underlying value domains. I speak of good food, good price, and good community. And then in that article, I try to explain that they, or sort of describe that all of these exist in food collectives, but not all of them are equal, or even, that each community that is formed around these direct relationships between households and producers, they all perform community differently. In each of these collectives, community might mean in practice different things. That community might be just that there is a possibility for communal action, but nobody actually takes action towards. But it might be just the idea of having the possibility of participating in the community if and when I want.
Yeah.
But the argument goes that community, or kind of the question that does community exist when nobody is there to act upon a community, right? So this is the kind of idea I develop in the article, that we should think of values as performative, as embedded in our action, that it's something that we do, not something that we have or possess.
Now, I don't know if you gave any thought on that, or when you were making a research, or when you're part of Oma Pelto, if you have observed any of this, but is there a certain member profile of Oma Pelto? I mean, a certain gender or race or economic situation, etc., more dominant than the others? And you can also, you can discuss this in Oma Pelto's context, but also you can expand this to the other food collectives that you studied with.
Yeah, this is a good question. In terms of Kaupunkilaisten Oma Pelto, our urban cooperative farm, I cannot say that there is a dominant member profile, and I think that is the best thing about it. I think that our strength is actually, compared to maybe other groups or communities, is actually that there are demographically very many different kinds of people. There are from like retired elderly people, to students, to single parents, to families with small kids, to families with big kids, to couples without kids, to to more of those city people, and more of those suburban maybe people who live in suburban. So and also income level varies. I know that there are people with high income levels, truly, well off, and also people who might not have such a big income, or high levels of income. So both exist. And now, for instance, a good example is that this year we made this. We have always tried to engage also with those people who are not always, for instance, they don't have the possibility. So during some years, we have given out shares to the church, which gives them out then to those people who can't afford, for instance, to participate in this. So the food bags sort of get to the people who really need them. And this year we have this possibility that you can, with your own labor input, if you go and harvest your food yourself, you can then sort of compensate for the lower price and sort of do. And of course, I understand that this is also problematic in terms of that if you don't have time or you don't have the means to go, but we try to also engage in groups so that you don't need to go there maybe every time. But if you're part of a group that goes and harvests together, then we can take turns and sort of even this out. And also the idea is to get to know people better. But this demographics is very interesting because how do these emerge? For instance, food collectives, and now I want to be clear that community-supported agriculture or food cooperatives are different from food collectives, right? So food collectives don't require such commitment, for instance, necessarily. Of course, there are many CSAs, and you can, like in the USA, if you go and participate in a CSA, you can just subscribe for 1 month and maybe even choose every item in your food bag and then just, say that thanks, but I don't want to be part of this anymore. But in Finland, people try to engage you for the whole season, preferably. Or in Oma, you have the summer season and the winter season and sort of different, but still a longer period than just 1 week or 1 month. But about the member profile or the demographics of the people is that some of the food collectives where people just get together and buy stuff directly from, producers, or we speak of reko rings, which are more of these pop-up market types where you engage in Facebook and many producers offer their stuff and you can choose from that. Some of the food collectives at their early stages were demographically quite similar. For instance, there were lots of mothers with young kids who felt the need to form these groups. So there was this very communal aspect to it, not only getting the food, but also having the neighborhood community or the motherhood community or the students. There were food collectives as part of the universities. So it could be a student organization or a student group or such. But at Oma Pelto, we don't have such demographics at the moment.
Okay. Now, expanding our discussion into your research, which was more general, like different kinds of food collectives that you studied, I have some questions. But first of all, how many food collectives did you study? And were they all around in Finland, or they were all in Helsinki metropolitan region? Is there a little bit? Can you give a little bit of information on that before, so that we can put into context the following questions?
Yes, of course. So I had 22 food collectives that I studied and interviewed, and most of them, or many of them, also visited myself or participated in a few of them myself. Some of them, one of them, for instance, was in Rovaniemi in Lapland, and a few of them were in Eastern or Central or Western Finland or Ostrobotnia, so the kind of the northern, the southern northern parts of the Finland. But obviously most because of also the population, how it's dense here in the capital region. So they were sort of located around the capital area. So many of the food collectives were in different regions around the metropolitan area. So including sort of Espoo and Vantaa and Tuusula and Helsinki and all of these, Järvenpää, and so kind of the surrounding areas.
Okay. Now, what do you think? Well, of course, as you said, explain yourself, food collectives work in different ways. But in one way or another, there is some kind of long-term and in a way direct relationship with a local farmer or several local farmers. So what do you think this kind of more direct and long-term relationship brings to a person, different than just going to any local market or farmer's market and shopping from there. Even if it's the same kind of, you're still looking for, let's say, organic and healthy and whatever food, but as a shopping more than this kind of engaging. What does it bring?
Of course, we need to speak of the nature of the relationships, because you can also have direct relationships without having the quality of the deep connection or relations. So I observed and noticed and sort of found out that it depends quite a lot on the nature of relationships. But for instance, regarding food collectives, where group of households form direct relationships with certain types of farmers, there is this kind of one type of reciprocity going on, because the farmer gives something, and exchange of information comes also the other way around. So the farmer also gets feedback for usually positive, but sometimes of course negative as well, and that's part of of learning and collective learning. But what I noticed is that this, for many farmers particularly, it was very important, or has been very important, to receive actually feedback for what they do, and this type of gratitude that people have towards their produce, which is basically lacking when we don't know who produces our food. So there is always a possibility for this type of a feedback loop to be developed in these food collectives, which I think is very important. But what we usually don't speak about, we have the tendency of thinking that what I call households usually are called consumers, and I don't like to use that term, but I think it's very important to be conscious about what concepts we use, because it gives us certain type of agency. So we are so used to being consumers and acting as consumers and acting upon the expectations that we as consumers are we learn that we can require, and customer is always right, and all of these, which is actually interesting, because I think that there's still a challenge in these cooperatives and food collectives and all of these, to get that reflection to the households, right? To get the households to think that what is it in our ways of how can we understand better what does farming actually means, and how should consumption maybe change towards what is possible. Because now the thing is that everything that consumer wants and needs can be done at the production side, right? So kind of production answers the demand. But how about the other way around? What can we learn as households from trying to engage more closely to food, how food is farmed and produced, and understand that, and from those try to adjust our own behavior towards, so sustainability is complex in this way. It's not just a one direction of sustainability. Let's improve sustainability of the farming, but let's improve being sustainable households and consumers as well.
So I understand, or I see then this buying your food, whatever it is, from a chain store versus being part of a food collective as reframing of food. And I feel like people change from consumer to active participants in the local system. Would you agree to that?
People have the possibility to do that. Mm-hmm. Whereas they don't have the possibility to do that in the conventional supermarket system. Mm-hmm. But they don't necessarily take that role, even though they can. So I do agree, but I wouldn't say that this is always the case.
Yes, of course. I mean, yes, as long as you wish to, of course, you become.
Exactly, yeah.
So what do you think is the strength of this kind of local food collectives, or let's say even local food movements, in changing the mainstream food system or mainstream food narrative?
Yeah, it's a good way to put it, because I have encountered recently many instances where this same question has been framed a bit differently, and it has been asked in this way, that how do you make these activities or these food collectives mainstream? And what you asked is that how do you actually raise some critical questions in the mainstream, or how do you impact the change in the mainstream, which is a bit different. And I like it more, because what I tend to argue or say, and what I have actually observed, and I believe in this, that many things that have started as marginal and radical and sort of, radical sustainability or radical organic movement and all of this, and many of these, that when they go to the mainstream, they blend in the mainstream. They don't actually change it that much, or they start operating within the logic of this sort of, and I say with this economistic logic quite a lot. And I think that's the problem. So rather, what are these kinds of local food collectives or communities? How are they challenging? Maybe I believe that the most potential and most the challenge for change is that people experience something differently. They get empowered that they can do things themselves, that they can make decisions based on their local needs, not based on some abstract pursuits or wants or, requirements or whatever. And it's very empowering to be able to act upon your needs and also feel that you are somehow responsible to your local peers and communities. So I think that's the most strength that these initiatives have, and it's very difficult to explain, or it's easy to explain, but it's difficult to understand. Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
If you're not part.
Yes. So you said that you had you researched 22 food collectives. Now, I see that there's quite a lot, but I don't know if you know about other countries who maybe had even longer time this kind of food collectives. What is the situation of Finland in comparison to other countries that have more, maybe livelier or more food collectives or this kind of movements or communities?
So to answer your question about what do I know, or how does Finland compare maybe, or what is the relationship to other countries regards food collectives and these activities, I have recently sort of looked into community supported agriculture initiatives more maybe than food collectives, but we can use this as an umbrella term because they're but for instance, a curious thing is that in Norway there are some more than 100 community supported agriculture initiatives. In Finland there are currently 10.
Okay.
And Norway is smaller than Finland, right? Also, usually when we talk about these alternative food systems or initiatives, we refer to Central Europe or Germany or France or Spain or these kinds of countries where there are more active sort of these initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
And Finland has not really taken this or integrated these as much into the daily practices of or everyday practices of people, so much as the other countries. And there are many things that we can speculate why this is the case. But I believe some of the reasons are also in the agricultural policy and how that has been done, because we all know that in Finland, the agricultural policy since the EU has unfortunately directed production in bigger and more centralized units and spread the production around the country in focused and kind of production lines in the sense. And these kinds of initiatives, they actually need small units, small farms and diverse production, right? So I don't know of any food collective where households would say, I know this farm where they produce like 1,000 cows and they live throughout the year in these tiny spots and they can't move. Let's go and get some milk from there. So I haven't found out that this is the case, but usually people want, they want these, they want to know that the farming is very ethical and that the farming methods are sustainable and environmentally friendly and that what they eat is healthy for them. And that's why they organize. They don't organize for buying something that we can have in the supermarket. Yeah. And if that is difficult to access, as it seems to be in Finland, at some point there were so many food collectives that the farmers, there were not enough farmers to supply. So I think this is one of the challenges that we have. We don't have small-scale diversified production or enough of it in order to facilitate or speed up or somehow accelerate these activities. Whereas, for instance, in Norway, the policy has been a bit different. Of course, they have their oil money, and with that they can do a lot, but they have kept their countryside alive. Unlike in Finland, the countryside is quite different. We all know how the villages empty up and they become deserted and So, but food is in the heart of any economy. So, if you don't have a lively local food system, then, you don't have the village. Yeah. You don't have that. Yeah.
And I also see many kinds of food collectives or community-supported agriculture, if you will, representatives of the notion of food sovereignty. For example, in the context in Finland, it's in a developed country, maybe also in relation to urban-rural relations. So what can you say about these food collectives and communities in the context of food sovereignty, and also if you give the definition of food sovereignty in your own words for our listeners, and you can say that in general, this kind of the relationship between food sovereignty and these kind of communities, but if you can particularly tell them about Finnish context, what can you say as an analysis?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not a food sovereignty scholar or researcher as such. I don't use that concept actively in my own work, but I do relate to that concept a bit in a way because that's the mirror concept for food security. And it's very important to know that food security is something that is used in global politics, and it's used against local farmers many times, or unfortunately that. And I wrote a piece about this, the other side of food security, where I kind of went through this logic behind the food security discourse, which is very powerful. It is driven by large corporations that have their stakes, not in supporting the sovereignty or the local small-scale diverse farmers and their rights to their land and to their seeds and to their production methods and to their communities and to their livelihoods, but rather driving their own businesses, agribusinesses, large-scale expansion, right? So food security is that other term against which I see, or this is my way of, I guess now some food sovereignty listener will can then correct me and write me that this is not the case, but I myself interpret it as a concept that partially sort of responds to this, or kind of works to bring another perspective of it, and to emphasize sort of the right of people, of local people, to their own decision making, and sort of decision making related how food is produced, what kind of food is produced, who produces it, how it is distributed. Because in this food security, the so-called developing countries, I don't like that term. I have started to speak of the global north or the Western countries, because I think there is a colonial aspect to developing countries and developed countries and all of this, and I don't think it's right to use that. That's also supported by the food security discourse, that developed countries are developing the underdeveloped, right? We need to secure their food, and it's always we do something for them. It's objectifying. So I believe this is very dangerous. So food sovereignty takes this discourse level back to those actors themselves, to hear their voices. And I believe that farmers have been engaging in this quite a lot themselves. So it's not corporate managers, or it's not politicians. It's not some kind of a large sort of corporate representatives or healthcare institution representatives from other side of the world, but it is the people who are actually locally influenced by the decisions, are acting and taking those decisions. That's where I kind of see food sovereignty coming in.
Now we talked about a little bit about like any certain member profile of Oma Pelto or food collectives or communities, but then there are also apart from these people, there are also actors or people who are marginalized by a food system. For example, so in the local context of Finland, who do you think are these people marginalized by the food system? Like, whose are the voices which are absent from the discussions, especially when we talk about things like sustainable food, local food system, etc. And can you think of some of the ways of course, this is a big topic again, but ways of how we can include them in these discussions and in this topic?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And it relates to this food sovereignty. You asked me actually to relate it to the Finnish context. So now I might do it with this question as well. I believe that if I was to generalize, I would say farmers in general are marginalized from the discussions of the transformation, maybe that we talk about, transforming the food system and towards a more sustainable and just and ecologically viable system. But that's a very big generalization, because farmers, there are so many different farmers and different kinds of farmers. And I really myself, I work with these quite small scale diversified farmers who sort of actively strive towards regenerative learning and improving and developing regenerative agricultural practices. And even though this has gained some popularity in the media recently, regenerative agriculture, it is still the discourse is still on the level of the markets. And I'm saying this because we speak mainly of carbon farming, for instance. And carbon farming, we all understand that if there is carbon that you can measure, you can build a market around it. So it's on the safe side to speak about that. That's a kind of a legitimate discussion. But those voices that are marginalized are exactly these people who are already doing things differently, quite radically differently. They're paying very much attention towards the qualities of their soils and the qualities of the produce and the diversity. And even the way that the labor becomes valued in these small farmers is different, because they put their labor not only monetary, like the labor can not only be valued in monetary terms, but it becomes a more holistic approach to farming in many ways. It's people's livelihoods and the surrounding communities. And I'm not trying to idealize this, because they're struggling as well. So there is this challenge of earning a livelihood while farming, and it's always a challenge. But what I am saying is that these voices of people who actively do things differently and try to actively do things differently, they're not heard. And I believe they are marginalized. Because we tend to think that they are some hippies, and it's a very, it's a hippie phenomenon, or this is very marginal, or nobody really, does this. If there are 3 farmers who do this, then, so there is this kind of a tendency to undermine these things.
Yes, I agree. And I always find that not just in this food agriculture context, but in many other contexts, topics, when sometimes people offer, like, suggest something radical, a new thinking, some people are always, you can't do that. But it's just because you can't do that in the existing understanding. But what these people are, or in, let's say, in the food and agriculture or any other similar topic, well, they are not trying. They are trying to change the current system. So they are not trying to fix something like an easy techno fix in some part of the system, and then it's going to change. No. So of course, if you try to fit things into the existing system, it doesn't work. But that's not the idea. The idea is to be able to think something radically different. Do we have to really always think that way, that is already existing and that we know already have problems? But this was a really interesting discussion, and also I learned myself quite a lot from your answers, and thank you. But these were all my questions. So do you have any final comments or words? And starting from this episode, I want to end the episode with a question from the guest to the listeners, to think after this, think more afterwards, and hopefully maybe even comment their opinions in any platform that they ask. So what would be your question to the listeners and your final comments?
So my question would be that if we think that we as humans need food and we eat food 5 times a day, how can we collectively start being more conscious about the food that we eat and the processes that made that food possible for us? That is my question. How can we be more conscious about it collectively as humans?
That's a very good question to think of. And even though I think about this, I'll think even more now about it. And I hope the listeners can also write about their answers in whichever platform that they follow. So thank you for this interview again, and we'll hopefully come back to your postdoc research as well in a few months, because it's a fascinating topic for me, and I'll be following your work more. And thanks again, and Bye.